U.S. Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke told a Senate Banking Committee today he's looking into the role that United States investment firms played in Greece's debt. Joining me now from our New York studio is Megan Carpentier, blogger for the Washington Independent. Megan, let's talk first about this relationship between Goldman Sachs and Greece. It's kind of a strange pair here.
Well, I don't know that it's such a strange pair. Goldman Sachs likes to make money, and Greece needed some money, so they made an arrangement by which they got money immediately out of Goldman Sachs that allowed them to hide some of their debt from their Eurozone partners, and Goldman Sachs got an investment vehicle that's proved to be very lucrative for them.
We have been hearing reports about bets that have been made on Greece's possible collapse. I mean, what kind of impact could this have on Greece?
I think the impact that it has on Greece depends a lot on what its Eurozone partners decide to do. Greece can default on its loans, and for the everyday Greek person, probably not much will change. There'll be some austerity measures that have to be put into place. It'll be harder to borrow money from to get sovereign debt to issue Greek treasury notes. I think the real problem is the implication that it has for the Eurozone and for the euro as a whole. Whether that can survive, whether the Eurozone can survive with one monetary policy and a bunch of disparate fiscal policies is the real question.
Talk to me about, a little more specifically about this relationship. How has Greece been interacting with Goldman Sachs, especially to cover up that debt?
Well, under the terms of the Maastricht Treaty, which established the euro, the members of the Eurozone were allowed to engage in what's called currency swaps, in which they were able to sort of hedge their bets that a currency would go up or a currency would go down and even things out. And that was the way that they were originally designed to work. When Greece was looking at joining the Eurozone, when they needed to keep within a certain debt limit, they made a series of deals with Goldman Sachs to engage in these currency swaps that had fake interest rates, that provided them with, in effect, cash up front, and pushed the debt can further down the road in the hopes that with appreciation and growth, the debt would be less of a percentage of their GDP, and then it wouldn't matter. And unfortunately, there was so much debt that they took on that between the financial crisis and the sheer amount of debt that they took on as part of these deals, they have all been exposed, and it turns out that their debt was out of line with the other European countries, with the rules that they'd agreed to. They're looking at potentially having to default, which is sort of the government equivalent of you or I declaring bankruptcy. And obviously, if you or I declare bankruptcy, it's harder to get credit, it's hard to buy a house, it's hard to get a credit card, and the same thing happens to countries on a national level. It becomes much more difficult to borrow to fund ongoing obligations like pensions and government salaries.
Megan, this is a topic that you have researched and written about extensively. We've talked about kind of the lead up here, but let's talk about the consequences. In the United States, a lot of people see Goldman Sachs as sort of an immortal corporation. Nothing can touch them. Is it possible that we will see European countries finding a way to punish Goldman Sachs for this?
Well, the question that starts to come up for a lot of these European countries is how many of them are able to do this, are able to punish Goldman Sachs when they've been engaging in some of the same problems. The more reporters dig into this, the more they find that Belgium's done it, France has done it, Italy's done it, Spain's saying they haven't done it, but people suspect that they have. Germany may have attempted to do it. Every one of these countries may have, at least in some small way, engaged in the very transactions that got Greece into trouble, whether they or not they did so to the same degree. So the question is whether these countries can get together and punish one company and yet still engage in the same transactions that they've seemed pretty willing and able to do while having punished one company for doing it. I think that's the big outstanding question.
And Megan, just very quickly here, your thoughts on the future for the United States regarding this relationship, the Greece-Goldman Sachs. How will this affect the United States?
Depending on what happens to the euro, I think the really interesting thing is that the Fed announced that they were going to investigate something today with regard to Goldman Sachs in Greece, which has been an announcement that people have been suspecting might come or might not at all come. And that in itself is really interesting because, of course, yesterday, former New Jersey governor and former Goldman Sachs executive John Corzine said everyone likes to hate Goldman Sachs, but it is just because Goldman Sachs is really successful. And it remains to be seen whether they can be successful in keeping government investigations out of their business.
All right, Megan Carpentier joining us live from our New York studio.